Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. And if this is your first time watching the show, we do long-form political commentary on the program, and every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream talking about the issues that matter with you. And you're able to respond to us, to give us your comments, and even call into the show. And that's streamed live on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter as a simulcast. And you're always able to respond to us and even call into the show. We hope that you'll be joining us this Sunday as well. Now, this program today, we're going to be talking about something which is a little different because everyone loves to make predictions. Everyone makes lists, especially at the end of the year. You normally see the top 20 or top 10 list of whatever the year was. But something that we do that's a little different is in January, and specifically on January 2nd of 2020, we made predictions for the year. And we said, this is what we think was going to happen. And so we not only did that, we're also going to go forward and we're going to double check. We're going to see how accurate were we? Did we get it right? Did we get it wrong? How right or wrong were we? We're about to find out. And I hope you join us. I think you'll be surprised what the results actually were. But without further delay, let's get into it. So the first thing we were talking about is a gentleman by the name of Andrew Yang. Everyone may remember him. He was running about fifth place out of the 26 Democratic nominees in 2019, looking to win the presidency. And there were a bunch of people, the Yang Gang as they were called, who thought he was going to be the next presidential candidate, especially with his $1,000 a month universal basic income that he was promising for everyone. Well, we said on January 2nd of 2020 that Andrew Yang would be out, and we said he would be out in February, that he was never going to make it all the way through. As it turned out, Andrew Yang was out on February 11th. We nailed that one exactly right. He's gone from that political picture, and so we nailed it. Now, we also were talking about, since we were talking about the election, we wanted to say, well, who was going to be the winner? Who would be the final person on the ticket for Democrats to go up against President Trump? And at that time, we made a pretty interesting prediction, because what we said was, we still believe that there's going to be a woman on the ticket for the Democrats. You're probably going to either see a Biden, Kamala Harris. Well, they don't like each other that much, but you could see a Kamala Harris and Joe Biden ticket. You could see a Warren, which I think is what is more likely, is to see Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg. That would give Democrats both a woman and a gay man on the ticket. And based on the identity, gender politics that's very popular for them, that's more important than anything else. Joe Biden is an old, rich, white male. In fact, almost everybody in the Democratic Party that's running for the nomination are old, rich, and white. So it kind of throws off their message that old, rich, white people are bad. So they have to have something that throws that off. Well, that's what I thought at the time. And it seemed to make a lot of sense at the time. But we were kind of right and kind of wrong. Because as much as it makes sense, or as much as it doesn't make sense, the Democrats were promoting and continue to promote that being white, straight males, old and rich are the anathema of the universe. That's exactly who they picked as their presidential candidate. Amazing. So we were wrong with Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren being the vice president picks. But we weren't completely wrong because, as we said, one of the options was the Biden-Harris run. And we had said since October of 2018 that Kamala Harris was a likely candidate for the vice president slot. So we want to call that one a draw. We got it right, but not quite the way you would think. It wasn't our first pick, but it was our backup and our long shot, and it was correct, which a lot of people weren't looking at that time. So not bad for January 2nd. We then went on to talk about the New York 22nd race. It's an incredible race. We knew that it was going to be one of the toughest races in the nation. We had no idea how correct we would be when we said that. We often had said that it would be the most competitive race or one of the top three in the nation. In fact, as of this moment on December 17th, it is the only House election for a congressman, congresswoman that has yet to be decided. That's impressive. But at the time, on January 2nd, we said that Claudia Tenney would win. And as of 2 days ago, Claudia Tenney is winning that New York 22nd race by not just 12 votes, as you see here, as reported by Fox News, but as of the 16th, yesterday, she is up to 13 votes in the lead. So we were correct that Claudia Tenney would be the winner of that race. At least that's what we expected this time. There's still untold, or there's several thousand votes that are being debated at this moment. There were votes that were found 30 days after the election that have now been introduced. And many of those votes were, or at least 20% of those votes were unregistered voters, and they've been thrown out. But it's a mess. It is a complete mess. But at this moment, Claudia Tenney is winning, and we're going to take that as being correct on that race. In addition, we also said in that race that there would be $15 to $17 million spent on the race. Now, this is a little bit of inside baseball because when you're looking at an election, most people tend to look at things, look at the summary, and they're looking at what is the candidate raising. And if you're looking at it that way, well, the race was only about $2 million more than in 2018. But that's not really where the money is in the election. The real spending came from the outside spending, from Nancy Pelosi, from Act Blue, and other organizations and other PACs. And in fact, what we saw that it was over $27 million in total, $27.2 million that were spent in total on the New York 22nd race, which is a huge amount, and $10 million more than our high-end estimate of $17 million. It was very high, especially without knowing anything about COVID or how the year would shape up. That's an incredible amount of spending. So we count that as also being, well, correct, just not as correct, call it half a star or half correct, because they went even beyond what we thought. And that was a high-end estimate at the time on January 2nd. Going beyond that, we decided to take a look at what was happening in New York politics. Now, this is a little tricky because YouTube has decided that they don't like certain words. And when they're said, they tend to, they've threatened to strike the channel, to strike the video, and delete it. But we're going to go forward anyway because we don't believe in restrictions on the First Amendment like that. We have been talking about voting irregularities and voting fraud in New York State. And we said that in the 2020 election, speaking about the primaries, that it would be rampant. What we didn't know is COVID-19 was around the corner and the primary period would be cut short with a lot of confusion, and that would lead for the entire year. But we were correct. There has been a lot of questionable things, irregularities to say the least. As we said about the New York 22nd race, there were voters, there were unregistered individuals trying to vote. Whether they were illegal aliens or not, we don't know for sure. But we saw that. We saw in Staten Island, 3 dead people were trying to vote that we caught and knew of. There were individuals who had someone vote in their name, even though they weren't supposed to. A lot of irregularities have happened in New York State. We count that as a win as well. Going beyond that, we also looked at New York State and said, hey, what's happening with bail reform? New York State was one of the leaders in addressing the idea or promoting the idea of bail reform because Andrew Cuomo wanted that and the New York State population did not. But we were promised it would not be a problem. Well, we said that we were going to see repeat offenders being released and having a problem for the New York population. And lo and behold, we found out as of June 13th, it was admitted that there were repeat offenders, and that out of 2,500 individuals that were released from Rikers, 250 of the individuals were reoffending. 10% went back and reoffended, with another, and each of those individuals doing 450 crimes, or about 1.8, just short of 2 times the number of crimes that for each person that was released. That number later went even higher to 13%. So even though Andrew Cuomo wants to blame it on everything but his bill, his bail reform bill, in fact, it failed just as we had expected and was a problem to the community. So what else did we make predictions on in 2020, January 2nd of 2020? Well, there was New York State's finances. Since we were talking about Andrew Cuomo, we wanted to highlight, and we thought 2020 would be another year showing the failed economic policies of Governor Cuomo. In 2019, New York State lost $6 billion. We believe they were on track to lose $8 billion in 2020. But we weren't quite right. As the Wall Street Journal points out in its article on October 20th, New York State has lost at least $59 billion. Some say as much as $61 billion. And in fact, there was a $14 billion shortfall for the year 2020, in excess of what we expected for the $8 billion. Now, to be fair, a lot of that has to do, or rather, in excess of the $8 billion, that extra amount is because of, well, COVID-19, something that no one could have predicted beforehand. But the problem was already pre-existing, and COVID-19 just made it worse. So again, we're going to count that as a win because we were right. New York State is losing money due to the poor economic policies of Andrew Cuomo. And COVID-19 is just making it that much worse. We also were talking about inflation in New York State. And in particular, specifically, we're talking about food inflation. Now, this is somewhat disputed, but essentially, we are seeing that New York State had an average inflation rate of about 3.2%, 3.21 to be exact, versus the 3.11% for the entire nation. New York was higher, and that's considered a very significant statistic. But to be fair, we had been talking about food prices. Now, what we can tell you at this moment is we're right. Food prices in 2020 for the nation did in fact increase, and increased by 3.6% over the 12 months ending on November 20th. This is data that's coming from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, which means that New York State also had those increases. Now, we thought it was going to be increased for a different reason, because of the unionizing of farms in New York State. But again, because of COVID-19, we couldn't tell what's going on in New York State and separate those numbers out because, well, everything went up substantially higher. But also speaking about New York State, we expected that since the census was going to be happening, we were going to find out that New York State was going to lose population and lose a lot of it. And we had estimated that it was guaranteed that New York State's going to lose at least 2 members of Congress, but it could be as high as 3. And we believe that it might be 3. Well, what we do know for sure is that New York State had lost about 1.4 million people as of 2019. 1.4 million people between 2010 and 2019 in July. And that is enough for 2 members of Congress. Each congressional district is about 700,000 people, 720,000 people to be exact. So we already had lost that. But then New York City alone lost 420,000 people, at least. And that is as of May 2020. Numbers have been even higher since that time, with far higher estimates of how many people have left New York City and New York State in total. We believe, depending on when the census seems to have only counted people as of April 30th, but at that time, we had already seen hundreds of thousands leave New York City and New York State due to COVID-19 with no intention of ever returning. It's still up in the air, but it is quite possible New York State may lose 3 members of Congress, not 2, like we predicted in January 2nd. So that one we're not going to count at all because it's still up in the air, but we think we got that one right too. Beyond that, we went on to also talk about riots. And even at the time, we thought there would be a lot of riots with BLM and Antifa, Black Lives Matters and Antifa. And in particular, we thought there would be a lot of problems in central New York, the southern tier, central New York, that middle of New York region in particular, that we would see a lot of protests, that we would see a lot of riots because of that group. Well, we were kind of right and kind of wrong for a lot of reasons. And in particular, what we do know is there were riots in New York State. In fact, there are still riots in New York State. And many of them were between May 29th and June 9th, when 450 businesses were looted and damaged due to what's called civil unrest, which is the code word instituted by the AP so that you don't have to say riot. So instead of saying riot, they are saying civil unrest. But no doubt they were riots in New York. And those riots had continued well into November, with multiple arrests being made on November 3rd. This is not something new. This has been continuous. But it wasn't just in New York City. In Rochester, in September 7th, between September 5th and September 7th, there were protests in Rochester, New York, with 11 people being arrested, 3 officers being hurt, businesses being disrupted and tackled, and we had shown that in several videos. That was a problem. It wasn't the only problem. Even more specifically, looking at the southern tier of New York, there was the burning of the recreation park, otherwise known as Rec Park in this region, the playground, which is the largest handy-capable playground in the Northeast, and was burned to the ground. And happened to be burned to the ground just hours after a Black Lives Matter protest. Now, while it is not possible, no one has been caught yet, and therefore no one knows if the arsonists were connected to the BLM protest that actually marched to that park and protested that park. It's something that the locals, the rumor mill, which we don't usually deal with, but the belief is in general that these were individuals related to Black Lives Matter and Antifa, and that they had committed the blaze. But no doubt there were instances, there were protests, and there were conflicts throughout the central New York, if not New York State region. Most recently with the Democratic Socialists of America in Ithaca, New York, having a conflict with Back to Blue supporters. So again, we're going to count that one as we got it right on January 2nd of 2020. We didn't know exactly why it was going to be right, But we did, in fact, get it right, which is kind of sad. We would have liked to be wrong about that one, quite honestly. But also, we had talked about Harvey Stenger and Binghamton University. Now, at the time, we thought that because of the November 2019 conflict between BLM and conservative students at Binghamton University, the mob attack of conservative students at Binghamton University, that President Harvey Stenger, Binghamton University President Harvey Stenger, would be forced to resign, and that Binghamton University would lose some, if not most, of its funding, both from alumni and from the federal government. We were wrong. They have not. But what we did not know is that this process is still ongoing. In fact, we broke the news on October 2nd that Binghamton University is currently under a Department of Education investigation because of that attack of students at Binghamton University in November of 2019. So it is something that is still very likely to happen in the near future. We may yet see Harvey Stenger resign. We may yet see that Binghamton University is going to lose federal funding. We just may have been ahead of time on that. But was it a prediction for 2020? No. So we got that one wrong. And we admit that freely. We also wanted to look internationally and expand the scope of what we were thinking of. Now, on January 2nd, tensions between the United States and Iran continued to flare up. In fact, we were being told by many Democrats at the time, Nancy Pelosi and others, that America was about to go into World War III again. This is a comment and a statement that had been made every year since the election of President Trump in 2016. So about the fifth time that we heard it publicly, that Democrats en masse said the United States was going to go into World War III with Iran. Well, what we did find out, and what we did say on January 2nd, is that Iran, which had just suffered the loss of their general, Soleimani, a member of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, which is a known terrorist group, which is funded and backed and is part of the integral part of Iran's government, that we had just killed him. The United States had killed him with a drone attack because of his terror activities. And Iran did, in fact, as we predicted, actually make an attack in Iraq against U.S. forces. And that was the Operation Martyr Soleimani, where we saw that Iran did strike back at the United States. Did that wind up leading to World War III? No, it did not. Did it escalate? No, it did not. Basically, Iran was saber rattling. As upset as they may or may not have been, what they did is they backed down. They told the United States government and the Iraqi government that they were going to send off missiles. They told us the time, and they almost told us exactly where. And so the United States reacted appropriately and moved everyone out of the way. And so Iran made their statement and made their attack in Iraq against U.S. forces. And then they also shot down a Ukrainian plane for no reason, a civilian airliner. It makes no sense. I guess they were trying to say, no, we were really serious. Who knows? But in terms of our prediction that Iran would attack the U.S. And in Iraq, that was true, and it did happen. And much as we expected, it did not lead to World War III. But speaking about World War III, there can be no comment and talk about that without also including talk about North Korea, which we did make on January 2nd of 2020. We did make a prediction about North Korea. And we had said at the time that there would be missile tests, but no real reaction. And in fact, what we found out was North Korea fired 2 missiles in March 2nd. And there was no real reaction throughout the world. In fact, they made 8 missile tests throughout the year of 2020, but the nation and the world was mostly occupied with COVID-19 and didn't have time for the little dictator of North Korea. And so that amounted to not much. Now, what may happen in 2021 with Joe Biden, that's a different question, and that could be a big problem. As it is expected that North Korea is going to be trying to fire off a ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, from a submarine, which would be terrifying if that actually works, but we'll see. And that's a problem for Joe Biden. Finally, of course, the big thing for 2020 was, would President Trump be impeached? Would President Trump be removed from office under impeachment? It was the buzz. It was the question from 2019 going into 2020. And what we had predicted was that, yes, President Trump would be impeached, there would be a vote, and it would amount to nothing. Well, we were correct. In February, President Trump was impeached. That impeachment was voted on, and it amounted to nothing. And President Trump remained president of the United States throughout 2020, even when it was inconvenient for Democrats when Supreme Court Justice died, Justice Ginsburg, and had to be replaced and was replaced by Justice Barrett. So all in all, we had a pretty good list there. We got a lot right. Got a few wrong. But overall, considering it was January 2nd of 2020 when we made those initial projections and predictions, it's surprising how much we got right. I'm looking forward to our predictions for 2021, but you can also look forward to seeing our predictions, our top 2020 moments that'll be coming out shortly as well. So one final thing is there is one prediction we did not speak about, and it was one of the first things we mentioned on January 2nd, and this is something that you can help with. On January 2nd, we said our target for subscribers to YouTube would be 4,000, that we wanted to hit that goal. We missed that goal. We're not going to hit 4,000, most likely. It's not impossible. Could still happen overnight, but we didn't hit that. But we are close to hitting 500. In fact, we are 10 subscribers away from 500. If you've enjoyed watching us, if you're interested in what our predictions will be going forward, if you want to see what we talked about and what were the big issues of 2020, subscribe. And you'll be notified as soon as we come up with those. And they'll be notified every Sunday at 2:30 on our live stream, which we invite you to. Well, we hope that you're going to have a great day no matter what. I know today, massive snow. I have 4 feet of snow out front of my yard, which I just finished shoveling. But I wanted to share this with you. Be careful for your backs. Happy Hanukkah. Merry Christmas if you don't see us again. And we will speak to you on Sunday at the latest. Thank you.